Good morning, everyone. You'll have to excuse my voice. I was been working in the Christchurch office a couple of days this week, and there was a bad cold that was going around. And obviously, by the time it got to me, it's kind of turned into a man flu, because that's what guys have. And so, just excuse the voice. We'll try and get through this today. We are currently about halfway through our series on the Psalms, week 4 of 8, and today we get to talk about anger and vengeance. Now, I don't know if the team thought that I was a particularly angry person and this would be good for me. Liam has been in the car when I've been driving, so that is a possibility. But whatever the reason, I have found this actually really helpful personally. We have said in this series that the Psalms give us a framework of how to bring to God in prayer and in worship any and every emotion, that nothing is off limits. And I guess today we're going to be testing that to the limit. We're going to look at how the psalmists reacted to severe oppression and injustice and how they turned that towards God, how they got angry, even vengeful, and they cried out to him. The technical name that theologians give for this type of psalm is imprecatory. But if you're anything like me, you've probably never heard of that word before. I hadn't before, like 3 weeks ago. I'm not even sure if I'm pronouncing it right. But as you can see from this helpful Google screen grab, the word imprecation means a spoken curse, and comes from the Latin to pray for or invoke evil or judgment upon someone. As you can also see from this next slide, the use of the word imprecation has steadily declined over the last couple of 100 years. So if you had no idea what it was, then don't feel bad, you're in good company. You can find imprecations in over 30 of the Psalms, but they only ever make up a part, sometimes a very small part of the whole Psalm. Most of them come within the Psalms of lament, Psalms in which the writer sets down exactly what is going wrong and how he wants God to help him. Pretty much all of the Psalms of lament follow a very similar pattern. They all include both requests to God that he would help them, but also appreciation for all that God has already done. They include both complaints to God and expressions of confidence within him. So to call them Psalms of vengeance may be a little misleading. More accurately, maybe we should refer to them as Psalms that include cries for vengeance. And many, I guess, we wouldn't regard as particularly shocking. For example, within Psalm 4, you find this: "Let those be put to shame and disappointed altogether who seek to snatch away my life. Let those be turned back and brought to dishonor who delight in my hurt." That sounds pretty reasonable, right? And then a lot of the language that could be regarded as sounding overly violent in nature are obviously metaphorical. Several Psalms use phrases like this: "Break the arm of the wicked and evildoer," or "tear out their fangs." One psalm asked that God would cut off all flattering lips, the tongue that makes great boasts. These are obviously not requests that God would torture the psalmist's enemies, but that he would break the power of them, that he would stop their ability to prey on the weak and the helpless, that he would silence them. But that all said, you can't get away from the fact that within several of the psalms, God is asked to put an end to the psalmist's enemy. He is asked to kill. He is even asked to wipe out the memory of them from the face of the earth. And some go into great detail about how exactly God should go about doing that. Of these, Psalm 109, written by King David, probably is the most well-known plea for vengeance, and it contains the longest plea for vengeance. So we're just going to read that to get a flavor of what these Psalms ask for. From verse 6, this is what David says: "Appoint a wicked man against my accuser. Let an accuser stand at his right hand. When he is tried, let him come forth guilty. Let his prayer be counted as sin. May his days be few. May another take his office. May his children be fatherless and his wife a widow. May his children wander about and beg, seeking food far from the ruins they inhabit. May the creditor seize all that he has. May strangers plunder the fruits of his toil. Let there be none to extend steadfast love to him, nor any to pity his fatherless children. May his posterity be cut off. May his name be blotted out in the second generation. May the iniquity of his fathers be remembered before the Lord, and let not the sin of his mother be blotted out. Let them be before the Lord continually, that he may cut off the memory of them from the earth. For he did not remember to show steadfast love, but pursued the poor and needy and the brokenhearted to put them to death. He loved to curse, let curses come upon him. He did not delight in blessing, may it be far from him. He clothed himself with cursing as his coat. May it soak into his body like water, like oil into his bones. May it be like a garment that he wraps around him, like a belt that he puts on every day. May this be the reward of my accusers from the Lord, of those who speak evil against my life. But you, O God my Lord, deal on my behalf for your name's sake. Because your steadfast love is good, deliver me. I'd imagine in our worship service, if someone brought that psalm, we may have taken the microphone off them. Don't you think? I mean, what do we do with this? What do we do with the psalms that actually ask God to kill the psalmist's enemies? Do we just take it as evidence that the people of the Old Testament were just an angry, vengeful, bloodthirsty lot? How do we reconcile the Old Testament curses and desire for vengeance with the words of Jesus, that we are to love our enemies and pray for those who persecute us? Or the Apostle Paul's specific instruction to bless those who persecute you, bless and do not curse. If we believe, like we do here at Christ Church, that all Scripture is God-breathed and is useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness, then what do we do with these psalms? We can't just ignore them and skip over them. Well, today I want to mention just a few things that I have found helpful when thinking about these. Hopefully, you'll find them helpful too. Number one, firstly, it is important to remember that the Psalms are musical poetry. Now, I know this sounds pretty obvious, but it can be easy for us to slip into the error of reading the Psalms in just the same way that we read all the other parts of the Bible, like the Proverbs or one of Paul's letters, for example. But they are not letters. They are not historical narrative. They are songs, which means that they were written not primarily to teach us doctrine, but to touch us and stir our hearts. And so the writers often use language that is intentionally emotive. They use hyperbole. They purposefully exaggerate. They express ideas way more strongly than they ever would in other ways. As one writer put it, a psalm is intended to appeal to the emotions, to evoke feelings rather than propositional thinking, to stimulate a response of the part of the individual that goes beyond a mere cognitive understanding of certain facts. So one of the first questions when reading a psalm is, what does the author want me to feel? And I think that it is clear when you read these psalms, the vengeance psalms, that we are meant to feel the full force of the pain and suffering that evil and justice causes. That these psalms are included in the Bible in part to wake us up to the reality of what it is like to suffer evil at the hands of evil people. I don't know if you've ever been sharing a room with someone who has screamed in their sleep. This has happened to me twice with my wife, Jax. She's been asleep and screamed, and I've obviously woken up completely shocked. We've had this kind of like relay. She screamed, I've woken up screaming, she's woken up screaming. But the thing is, when someone screams and you wake up, terror instantly grips your heart. A scream does that to you. Or maybe you're a parent, you've been kind of in one room and you hear your child give the most blood-curdling scream in the other. Your heart just stops for a second, then it sinks and you rush in. What is the first thing you are thinking? What must have happened to them to cause that? And that is what we are supposed to think when we read these psalms. What must have happened to this psalmist to cause them to cry out like this? The New Testament scholar Derek Kidner says that these psalms act in a similar way. They have the shocking immediacy of a scream to startle us into feeling something of the desperation which produced them. So when we read the psalms, we need to remember they are primarily trying to make us feel something. And then secondly, we need to put them into perspective, the context in which they were written. You know, when the psalmist is crying out to God to destroy his enemy is not a neighbor playing their music too loud. His enemy is not a taxi driver who's cut them up as they cycle to work. They are my enemies. They are the things that make me angry. No, that's not what the psalmist is talking about. The psalmists have actual real-life enemies who are trying to annihilate them, to kill them, to wipe out their people. Throughout most of the Israelites' history, they have lived surrounded by powerful empires who are out to destroy them. And many of these psalms were written either when the armies were on the march to them, or they've already conquered Israel and carried off their daughters and killed their sons. Even the personal psalms of David are about powerful, wicked men who wanted to kill him, overthrow his kingship, and then exploit and oppress the people that he loved. So in my safe, enemy-free life, I may be shocked when I read of these godly men and women calling out to God for the death of their enemies. But I have to remind myself that I have never, and hopefully will never, known oppression and injustice and suffering like they have. This was brought home to me this week, actually. I don't know if any of you guys saw this. Jax and I watched the heartbreaking Channel 4 documentary, Children on the Front Line, about children growing up in the midst of the Syrian civil war in Aleppo. These children had seen their family and friends be picked off by sniper fire. They'd seen their neighbors bombed out of their houses. They'd seen people blown up in front of them on the street. They had known people who were kidnapped and tortured to death. They lived in constant fear of being killed. And so when Mohammed, a boy of 14, is interviewed and he says that if he were to ever capture President Assad, he wouldn't want to kill him. He would want to torture him, to give him a taste of what he has done to them. Jax and I weren't sitting there with kind of judgment over them thinking, well, he should just learn to forgive. No, we were just heartbroken at the level of suffering that he must have endured to produce a response in someone so young. In the worship, I really felt God's closeness for people who have suffered. And it may be that right here in this room, people who are part of us have suffered greatly, suffered at the hands of evil, wicked men who do feel anger, who do want vengeance upon them. And if that is you, I just want you to know that we don't judge you for that we are just heartbroken for you, because God is heartbroken for you. And it is my prayer that you would find a family here to help you walk through pain and suffering, that you would find a family that stands with you and prays with you and sees God heal you and set you free from your past. But it is also my hope, my expectation, that we will learn much from you. That as you share your story with us, we will be encouraged by your strength and strengthened by your courage. That we would learn from you what it is like to lean on God through the hardest of times. So when reading through the Psalms, we need to keep in mind that they are Psalms. So they must be read like Psalms. We must remember the context that they were written in. And if we do that, I think that it becomes clear that beneath all of these angry, emotional cries for vengeance, there is simply a plea for justice to be done. A plea that the wicked would be punished, that the innocent and defenseless would be vindicated. In his book, The Psalms and the Life of Faith, Walter Brueggemann makes a convincing argument, well, at least I think it's convincing, that even in Psalm 109, which on the surface can just look vindictive and excessively vengeful, is actually concerned with justice, and in this particular case, economic justice. Brueggemann argues that in this psalm, there's a precise match between guilt on the one hand and punishment on the other. That in essence is just a request that one, despite their power, wealth, and influence, has caused untold suffering to the poor by refusing to show them steadfast love, should himself be kept from receiving steadfast love. David is just asking that his enemy should be required to live as he, by both his action and inaction, has caused the poor to live. That he should live without any economic aid or protection. And then all the suffering that is described in that psalm, the begging children, creditors seizing his land, strangers plundering the fruits of his toil, all that is just a natural result, the natural consequence of being poor and powerless in a place where steadfast love from the powerful is not shown. The desire for justice at the heart of these psalms is something that all of us, I think, can understand. It is rooted deep within us. Now, we may have different ideas about what that justice should look like. Who gets to decide what justice really is? But all of us, I think, feel instinctively that justice is important. Which is why stories of people looking for and finding justice are just so powerful. It's why we love them. If you are an author or a scriptwriter and you want your audience to sympathize with your main character, the easiest thing to do is have something terrible happen to them at the beginning of the film at the hand of the villain. Have the villain do something awful to them that they were powerless to stop, that they didn't deserve, and then instantly the audience is on their side. In fact, our desire for justice can be so strong, especially when the innocent have been wronged, that even when the outcome of the film kind of shifts and moves into vengeance rather than justice, even when it moves into kind of morally dubious territory, gets overly violent, we are still on the side of the main protagonist. We want the bride to kill Bill and the Deadly Viper assassination squad. We want Django to blow up Candyland. I was wondering if that would work this morning. I thought it would definitely work this afternoon, but a few of you got that. How about this? Gladiator. This is where my voice might come in handy. We want Maximus Decimus Meridius, commander of the armies of the north, husband to a murdered wife. That's quite Russell Crowe, that bit, wasn't it? Father to a murdered son. We want him to have his vengeance in this life or the next. And actually, we want him to have his vengeance in this life. We want to see it happen. We want to see him kill Commodus. And then The Princess Bride, which was on TV over Christmas. When Saul from Homeland, did you know that was him? Saul from Homeland, anyone watch Homeland? Yeah, Saul from Homeland as a young man. When he stands in front of the six-fingered man and he says, I don't think I'm going to do the accent for this. Hello, my name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die. We want him to kill him. Thanks. These films tap into our desire for justice, a desire that I believe is hardwired into us because we have been created in the image of a just God. Yes, sometimes our sense of justice can be distorted. And yes, sometimes it can drift into the realm of vengeance rather than justice. But a desire for justice is good and is entirely appropriate. And when we see injustice happening around us, we should cry out to God for him to stop it. But it's also important to realize that because our sense of justice can so easily shift, especially when we have been personally wronged, because it can be easily distorted into vengeance, into just causing our enemies pain and suffering, then maybe we should leave the justice to God. I think it's helpful to realize that in these Psalms, the cries to God are that he would act justly, that he would avenge the psalmist. They are not declarations of what the psalmist intends to do. Or to put it another way, the psalmist may have cursed, but they didn't go on to kill. King David may have been deeply stirred to anger by the cruel and oppressive actions of the wicked, but when he was under personal attack, he showed huge restraint, even compassion towards his enemies. On 2 occasions, when King Saul has brought an army out to capture and kill him, 2 occasions David sneaks into the camp and manages to get inside Saul's tent, and he has the opportunity to kill him. But he is overcome with feelings of remorse that was even in his heart. He's overcome with a desire for reconciliation. He says, who am I to touch the Lord's anointed? Vengeance belongs to God, not to me. The clear teaching of both the Old Testament and the New is that only God can be trusted to judge rightly and fairly. So God's people should leave vengeance down to him. You may have heard the saying, vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, probably from the New King James Bible. That's from Deuteronomy. Proverbs 20 says, do not say, I will repay. Wait for the Lord and he will deliver you. These Psalms are just an expression of pain and anger rather than a call to violence. And because of that, I think that they act as a model for how we should deal with our own anger. The truth is that all of us, at times, will feel bitterness, anger, even hatred towards other people. And the important thing is what we do in that moment, when the pain is raw and real and almost all-consuming. How do we stop ourselves from doing something that we will later regret? From lashing out with words and even fists? How do we stop ourselves being consumed by hate? Well, maybe the first step to dealing with our anger is to do what the psalmists do and express it to God. To be as brutally honest as they are. To say to God, I am angry, I have been wronged, I want revenge. These Psalms teach us that we don't have to have it all together in order to come to God. We don't have to wait until we are in a quote-unquote good place. We don't have to wait until our hearts are pure and all we're thinking about is love and forgiveness. No. I believe that God put these Psalms in the Bible as an invitation to come to him just as we are, as permission to tell him how we really feel, so that we walk these things together through with him. That we don't try and change ourselves on our own. We go to God and allow him to change our hearts. And there's no point hiding this stuff from God anyway. He knows how we feel. He knows what's going on inside. Other people may not know, but God knows. Expressing that to him isn't going to shock him. It's not like he's listening to us pray and he thinks, wow, I just never knew you were so angry. I mean, this changes things. This really does. That's not what God is doing. No, the good news of the Bible is that God accepts us just as we are. We may be the angriest person in the world. Our anger may have led us to do horrible things, think horrible things. But the message of these Psalms is don't let your anger keep you from God. Bring it to him. In the worship, Ross talked about how babies kick about and the parent will just pick them up and calm them down. No parent is looking at a baby kicking about and saying, well, you just need to calm down before I pick you up. Okay, once you've calmed down, then we can cuddle. But until that point, I'm staying away. That is what God is like. He doesn't wait until our kicking is stopped. He picks us up. He holds us close. And it is in his embrace that we calm down, not before. And if expressing our anger to God is a good place to start, I want to finish up by looking at how Jesus completely transforms both our expectation of how God actually delivers justice and our relationship to those who have wronged us. It is apparent, I think, that the psalmist had a very limited understanding of eternity. They pretty much believed that death was the end, and so justice, if it was to come, had to come right here and right now in this time. Or if not right now, then maybe sometime in the future. If not for them, then maybe for their kids. But the teaching of the New Testament and also our experience is that that is often not the case. That often the innocent don't appear to get justice. Often the wicked apparently get away with it. And that no matter how much we try and stamp out evil and injustice, we will never finally be rid of it in this life. To steal a Lord of the Rings quote before Andy has got to it, I don't know if there are many left. He's probably actually said this one. This is what it says in Lord of the Rings. Always, after a defeat and respite, evil takes another shape and grows again. Evil, it seems, is always with us, no matter what we do. Which isn't to say that we can or should just give up pursuing justice, that we should stop praying for it. I think it's clear from history that Christians have always been at the forefront of justice issues. If you want a really interesting read that will completely blow apart the negative stereotypes that you may have had of Victorian missionaries, you should read The Missionary Roots of Liberal Democracy by Robert Woodbury in the American Political Science Review. His main thesis is that there is a direct correlation between the presence of Christian missionaries in a country and that country developing a robust democracy. I know that probably completely blows your mind. If your view of missionaries is from the Poisonwood Bible or kind of school lessons, that will blow your mind that missionaries did a lot of good. And he shows that because these missionaries loved the people that they were sent to, when they saw that they were being wronged, they wanted to make it right. They fought tirelessly for justice. In the 19th century, John Mackenzie campaigned for 30 years to protect African land from white settlers in South Africa. He came back home, he arranged political rallies, he even met with Queen Victoria. In the early 1900s, two British Baptists, John and Alice Harris, went to the Belgian Congo, and there they experienced the brutal treatment, murder, and enslavement of a whole people group because of the expanding rubber trade. If villages didn't get involved in it, then their children's limbs were cut off and their villages burned to the ground. They smuggled pictures of this. They were some of the first activists to use photography to help. They smuggled these pictures out of the country, and they aroused one of the largest international protests since the abolition of slavery. In China, missionaries worked to end the opium trade. In India, they fought to curtail abuses by landlords. In Ghana, they set up schools and printing presses to educate the poor. In the West Indies and other colonies, they played key roles in building the abolition movement. Pursuing justice has been, always will be a fundamental part of what we do. But we are not naive. We know that despite our best efforts, we will never be able to rid the world of darkness by ourselves. And our hope and expectation isn't that we would be able to create a utopia here on earth. The Bible never tells us to hope for that. The hope that the scriptures give is that one day the risen and resurrected Jesus, who defeated the power of evil and death on the cross, will return to swallow up the darkness once and for all, forever, to redeem and restore creation and usher in a new age. There will be no more suffering, no more pain, no more tears. This is how one writer puts it. At some point, for all eternity, there will be no more unmerited suffering. This present darkness, the age of evil, will eventually be remembered as a brief flicker at the beginning of human history. Every evil done by the wicked to the innocent will have been avenged. Every tear will have been wiped away. That is what we are looking for. And being certain that Jesus will one day return and make everything right. That, as Martin Luther King said, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. That gives us the strength to deal with injustice on a daily basis. If we know that one day we will look back upon all of human history from the vantage point of eternity, and that from there, even a whole lifetime of suffering and pain will seem like nothing more than a single night in a bad hotel before the start of the most amazing holiday, that gives us the strength to hold on when justice doesn't seem to be coming. So we have a different expectation of the timing of justice than the psalmists. And because of the cross of Jesus, we also have a different relationship to those who have wronged us. If King David was here and I asked him to look at this screen, we split everything into good and bad and say, like, how do you do that? World population, split out for me, King David. And he would probably do something like this. On the one hand, you have Israel, other hand, Israel's enemies. I mean, that was kind of base, that's what he thought. Like, if you were for Israel, if you worshipped Israel's God, then you were good and like justice should be coming to you. If you weren't, then like woe betide you. If I asked you the same question, I wonder what you would say. How would you divide the people of the world? Who would you put into each side? What kind of criteria would you use to sort people in that way? As you're thinking about that, let me tell you the story of Adolf Eichmann and Yehiel Deneur. Adolf Eichmann was one of the architects of the final solution in the Second World War. After the war ended, he managed to escape to South America, but he was tracked down, he was arrested, captured, taken back to Israel in 1960, and there he was put on trial, and eventually he was killed, executed. As part of the trial, the prosecution had to track down people who had survived the Holocaust, who had actually seen Adolf Eichmann in the concentration camps. And the prosecution found a survivor called Yehiel Deneur, a Polish Jew who had survived 2 years in Auschwitz. The prosecution team spent hours and hours preparing him for the moment where he would walk into court and become face to face with a man who had murdered hundreds of his close family and friends, the man who had orchestrated the extermination of his people. And the time came for him to testify. He was escorted into the courtroom. But as soon as he set eyes on Adolf Eichmann, sitting composed and well-dressed behind a glass screen, he completely broke down. He fell to the ground. He sobbed uncontrollably. It became obvious that he was in such a state he wouldn't be able to testify, and so he was kind of dragged out of the court. Years later, he was interviewed about his reaction that day. He was shown a tape of him falling down, and the interviewer asked him why he had broken down like that. Was he overwhelmed by painful memories of his time in Auschwitz? Or was he overcome with hatred towards this man? Was that why he collapsed? Yehiel Deneur said no. And then he said something that shocked his interviewer, something that should really make us think. He said, I was afraid about myself. I saw that I am capable to do this, exactly like he. He looked into the face of Adolf Eichmann and was overcome by the realization that he wasn't looking into the face of a monster. He was looking into the face of another human being who had done monstrous things. And he had the self-awareness to realize that maybe they were not so very different after all. That maybe if he was put in similar circumstances, given similar power, that he could be capable of monstrous things too. That anyone could be. Or you can make the argument the other way. I remember my GCSE history teacher saying that the world would be very different if Adolf Hitler was a better painter. I don't know if you know this, but when he was a teenager, he moved to Vienna to try and make it as a painter. He applied twice to the Academy of Fine Arts, but both times he was rejected because he wasn't good enough. Can you imagine what would happen if he'd got in? If he'd made a life for himself in Vienna? If that was where he stayed rather than going back to Germany? He may have still ended up an angry, angry little man, but his life may have only impacted upon a few. This is how C.S. Lewis puts it. One man may be so placed that his anger sheds the blood of thousands, and another so placed that however angry he gets, he will only be laughed at. But the little mark on the soul may be much the same in both. Each of them is doomed if he will not turn to God. When Jesus says in Matthew 5, "You've heard it said, do not commit murder. Whoever murders will be liable to judgment. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable for the same judgment." We can think, Jesus, that's going a little over the top, isn't it? But I think his point that was shouting at your brother and murdering him may look very different on the outside. They are very different on the outside. But in reality, they are just differences of degree. They both come from a heart that isn't functioning the way it should be. Hearts that have the potential to cause hurt and pain to other people, given enough time, given the right circumstances. And I think that if we are honest with ourselves, if we look long and hard at the state of our own hearts, we would have to admit that maybe everything is not as it should be. That there isn't just the potential for great harm, we have actually already caused great harm to the people in our lives. And so if we go back to the groups, the good and the bad, if we had to divide the world again, maybe you'd do this like I would. The bad, that's me, and everyone. We're all in that together. And actually there's only one person who has ever lived that could safely stand inside this group. And that is Jesus. Which leaves us with something of a problem, does it not? We have already argued that carrying out justice is a good thing. That those who cause harm to others shouldn't be allowed to go on causing harm indefinitely. That they should be stopped. That they should be judged. But we have just said that all of us fall into the group that should be judged. When I was talking about God's timing a minute ago, you may have been thinking, why didn't Jesus just sort it all out when he came to earth 2,000 years ago? Why didn't he sort it all out now? Why do we have to wait for him to come back? This chart is why. If Jesus came to earth the first time to judge the earth, to bring a final justice, if he came to destroy the power of evil wherever he found it, which was well within his rights to do as the morally perfect Son of God, he would have had to have destroyed everyone. But God loves us so much that he didn't do that. As it says in John 3:17, God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him. Jesus didn't come the first time to judge the world, he came to save it. He didn't come to bring justice, but to bear it on our behalf. He didn't come with a sword in his hand, he came with nails through his hands. Because of his great love for us, he swapped places with us. He took all of our wickedness upon himself, and on the cross he was judged in our place, so that we could be forgiven and forever free of judgment. The story of the Bible is not about good people and bad people. It is about bad people and a good God who became bad in order to make the bad people good, which is complicating, I know, but that is the story. As we understand that we are people who deserved cold, unemotional, impartial judgment, but that instead God extended to us forgiveness. That instead of justice, God has given us mercy. It gives us the power to do the same with other people who have hurt us. One final story, and then I'm finished. In the final chapters of his new book, David and Goliath, Malcolm Gladwell contrasts the way that two families deal with unspeakable tragedy. Both families live through the horror of one of their daughters being murdered. Mike Reynolds' 18-year-old daughter Kimber was shot and killed in a mugging that went horribly wrong. Cliff and Wilma Dirkson's 13-year-old daughter Candace was taken on her way home from school, and her body was found 7 weeks later, hands and feet bound, frozen to death. Both families sought justice for their daughters. Both families wanted their daughters' killers arrested, tried, and imprisoned. But it was the heart response of the Dirksons that completely stopped Malcolm Gladwell in his tracks. Candace's Disappearance sent shockwaves through her local community. When she went missing, the city launched the biggest manhunt in its history. And when her body had been found, when the funeral had taken place, the Dirksons gave a press conference. They were asked by a reporter, "How do you feel about whoever did this to Candace?" Cliff then said these remarkable words: "We would like to know who the person or persons are, so we could share, hopefully, a love that seems to be missing in these people's lives." And then Wilma continued, "Our main concern was to find Candace. We found her. I can't say at this point I forgive this person," she said, emphasizing the "at this point." And she finished the press conference by saying, "We have all done something dreadful in our lives or have felt the urge to." It took another 20 years for the police to find Candace's killer. And during that time, Wilma and Cliff wrestled with their anger, with their desire for retribution. It wasn't an easy ride in any way. But in the end, they came to the place where they could honestly say that because of their faith in Jesus, they had forgiven the man who had taken their little girl. In a recent interview, Malcolm Gladwell explained that sitting down with the Dirksons, hearing their story was so powerful that it brought him back to faith in God. He said it is one thing to read in a history book about people empowered by their faith, but it's quite another to meet an otherwise very ordinary person in the backyard of a very ordinary house who, because of their faith, has managed to do something utterly extraordinary. A desire for justice is good. It is natural. It may even stop the evil outside of us for a while, but in the end, it has little power to defeat the evil that is within us. Only forgiveness can do that. Only forgiveness can destroy my enemy by making him my friend. Shall we stand?